I'm going to let Jessica and Wendy introduce themselves first before we get started. Jessica, would you like to go ahead and go first?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Jessica Nelson. I have spent the last 20 years in the fashion industry. So I've worked both for contemporary brands like Marc Jacobs and Coach, and I've also worked in luxury for brands like Louis Vuitton. And excited to be back in Austin. I graduated from school here, and 18 years after New York, I'm here working for Kendra Scott in the role of Vice President of Merchandising, Planning, and Allocation. So in every merchandising role that I've had in every capacity, these pricing conversations have been extremely important. So I think I have a nice perspective to share from different types of industries.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Wendy.
Hey everyone, I'm really happy to be here with you today. I'm Wendy Nunley, and I am the SVP for growth at Diageo, which is the company that owns Johnnie Walker Whiskey, Guinness Beer, Smirnoff Vodka, as well as many other wonderful alcohol brands. I have mostly been in the beverage industry over the past many years. Before I joined Diageo 3 years ago, I was at Coca-Cola, both in the US and in Japan. And I lead the growth function at Diageo. And what that really means is how do you grow in a smart way? And part of that is pricing. And how do you price your products in the right way to drive the kind of growth that you want to see and send the right messages to consumers and investors and everybody. So I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to your questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. And I think I love the perspective we have here of Jessica coming from, jewelry, high-end luxury, and Wendy coming in from the food and beverage space. So it's gonna be a really unique conversation. And I will say too, that if you guys have questions, like Katrina said, put them in the chat. We'll get to them as we go. So feel free to chime in as much as you would like. But the first thing I wanted to start with, and Wendy, I'll start with you first, is what do people usually get wrong when they're thinking about pricing?
A mistake that I see people make, and I should also mention that on the side, in addition to my day job, I'm an angel investor. And something that I see happen a lot of times, especially with smaller companies, is that people will do kind of cost plus pricing. So they'll look at whatever their COGS are, they'll add a percentage to it, and they'll price their product that way. But really where you want to start is with the consumer and what the consumer is going to be seeing and how they will perceive it and who you're competing with, and start from that direction first, and then you work your way backwards. So that's one of many mistakes that I see people make when they're pricing their product.
Jessica, how about you from your perspective?
The same, pricing on margin. Just one exercise I've always made my teams do is to price our product before we have any costing information, so that you're not being influenced by what you find the product costs are. So it's the purest form of getting it right, is not being allowed to look at the pricing when you have your first produce.
And I think that leads greatly into our second question there. What do you first think about when you start pricing? And Jessica, I think you led on to that right there. Is like, that's what your team starts with. Wendy, from your perspective, what do you start with when you start with pricing? Where do you go?
Well, so one of the things that I think about is that price is one of the biggest ways you're going to be able to communicate the value of your brand. And so I really start with thinking about what do I want my brand to communicate, and who am I competing against, and think broadly about who you're competing against. It may not be the whatever other brand is doing the exact same product you are, a very similar product as you. It could be broadly, what else might this consumer be consuming in place of whatever my brand is offering. And so I really like to think about what am I trying to communicate to my brand, and who else is out there, and what are they communicating. So that would be a good starting place for me.
Jessica, do you do that too? Do you tend to look at competitors and like how they're communicating as well when you're thinking about how you price?
Absolutely, but I really think looking at really understanding your brand positioning and philosophy and making sure that you're being true to that it is very important in order to protect your brand. Different types of brands and positionings happen quite differently, and I'll give you two examples. At Kendra Scott, we know our product is aspirational, but it also needs to be approachable. If you ask a customer how much they're willing to pay, of course the customer wants to pay less. So I think that we have to be true to our brand and the quality and the integrity that we put into our products by pricing it approachably and where it needs to be. If you take cues from the luxury industry, luxury is intentionally pricing for scarcity because luxury is scarcity. So if Louis Vuitton starts to see too many monogram bags out there, that there's concern that you're going to influence the customer into thinking that this is no longer luxury because too many people have them, they take an annual price increase. And they'll take the price increase so that they're controlling scarcity of their products as well. So I think it really, you just have to know your brand positioning.
I love that. And thinking about brand positioning as well, what psychology, this is, I think, my favorite topic we were talking about last week is, what psychology do you guys think about? Because I think so many people think about the margins and then they stop right there. What psychology goes into it? And Jessica, I'll let you continue on, and Wendy, I'll get to you next.
One example is in my career, in luxury environments, you price in zeros and fives. You end your price point in a 0 or a 5. And in contemporary, you've ended your price in 8. So one of the first things that I did when I joined Kendra Scott was I took the extra $3 on every single product immediately and just took a $3 price increase from every 45 to 48. From every, just $3 across the board, 3 margin dollars. So if you look at our luxury expression, which is our fine and sterling silver, we price in zeros and fives. So there is something about the mindset of what you end with, especially in my industry, that's psychological to the price point and the value of the product that you're buying. We also really think about our magic price points. So for me, my average price is upwards of $50. So I have to make sure that I'm feeding my most important price buckets and making sure that when I'm landing an assortment or landing a line, do I have enough strength in the magic spots? Under 50, under 100, up to 150 for sterling and fine. But you really have to just make sure you're going to deliver that punch of a great product in those psychological buckets.
I think everyone's running to Kendra Scott right now to see the pricing that you have. Wendy, how about you, thinking about the psychology of pricing as for Diageo and beyond?
It's very similar. Actually, the numbers are different. There are fewer digits in the number when you're talking about food and bev typically, but the psychology is very similar. So in food bev, you would usually end in a 9. And the 99s are very important. So for example, if you're thinking to price your product at $3.89 versus $3.99, don't even bother with $3.89. The consumer won't perceive a real difference between $3.89 and $3.99, and you might as well take a little bit of extra, few more pennies and get the $3.99. Now that said, the difference for a consumer between $3.99 and $4.09 is massive, massive. I remember in a previous job that I had in a previous life where we would draw graphs and show the drop off that would happen when you went from $3.99 to $4.09. So that 10-cent difference, because the price now starts with a 4 instead of a 3, is huge. So really be mindful of those thresholds that you might hit, and really try to stay underneath key thresholds, which of course are at the 99s, but also at the 29s, 49s, and typically 79s. So that's one thing that it's fun to think about, but it's also really important, especially when you're a small food and bev brand. You're probably going through distributors to get to the outlet, and doing all the math to figure out where you're actually going to end up on the shelf, so that you don't end up at a weird price point like $4.09 is really important to do. Can I add another point about psychology as well?
Please do. Yeah.
That's not exactly the same, but is really important too, is think about where you're going to be in the store. And this probably applies for fashion in a somewhat different way, but a similar principle is really think about where you're going to be in the store. So an example I always like to give, and I think I gave it on a webinar like this before, is Beyond Meat. So Beyond Meat specifically went into the meat section. So when you're thinking about pricing, the shopper is walking up to, like a ground beef package or Beyond Meat, and that's their comparison point. And you need to think about that for pricing. So it would apply in food and bev and other categories as well. Is, are you going to be sitting in the organic section of the store, or are you going to be sitting in the mainstream section? And how does that mean your pricing looks? In the organic section, the prices tend to be a lot higher. And so you may not look as different if you're a premium price product than if you're in the mainstream section. So where you are in the store will play into the psychology of a shopper walking up to your product, and they're going to be comparing it in that moment to the things that are right next to you on the shelf, and less likely to be comparing you with something that's all the way across the store, which I think is an interesting psychology bit as well. So where do you want to be in the store? Because that will also affect your price point.
I think one of my favorite moments was Rhythm Superfoods. I was walking through Whole Foods and I was a new mom and I was trying to, do everything organic and only eat, fruits and vegetables. But Rhythm Superfoods had their kale chips in the produce section. And I was like, oh, and of course I picked them up, and now we still, buy them because I picked them at that one time, and then the whole family loved them. And it was just such an interesting place to put them that I hadn't thought about that. And I probably wouldn't have picked them up if I had been somewhere else. Just psychologically, I was very ready to, engage with that product. So that's a really, really good point, Wendy. Thank you.
Yeah. Because a Rhythm Superfood in the mainstream potato chip section would appear more expensive than it would in the organic produce section, even if it's the same price point. Right. So I think those are interesting and important things as well.
Yes, my body is ready for Lay's potato chips, not kale chips when I'm in the chip bottle. I'm not ready to accept kale chips when I'm looking at Lay's. It doesn't make any sense. I will go for Lay's. And then what about, I know we talked about margins, that's not where you start, but margins do play a role into this. And Wendy, I'm going to start with you first of like how margins do play in the role of this. And Jessica, I'll get to you with that question as well.
Oh, well, their margins play into it in many ways. I mean, one area is that margins are important. I would start by saying if you have different flavors, for example, like let's say you're doing, beverages and you've got raspberry and lemon and, who knows what else. I would say the price that you charge should be the same for the same size package. And so that would be a starting point. Now, if you're struggling with margins and the price point that makes sense versus competition and makes sense for what you want your brand to stand for has terrible margins, obviously there are things that you might need to work on in terms of your scale and so on. But one thing I really like to do is just make your package smaller and see if you could squeeze out some more margin doing that. You see it happen in a lot of different categories where people will just play with package sizes to make it work. And it might be that hitting that $3.99 price point in a smaller pack will make a ton of sense versus trying to be in a bigger pack and having to be at $4.39 and that may not make as much sense and you might not get as much pull.
And Jessica, from your perspective, this is an interesting, I think thinking about margins and the different, you can do different packaging sizes, but how do you guys go about that, thinking of margins at Kendra Scott?
Sure. I mean, I think when you're getting started, you have to sometimes accept a lower margin because you don't have the resources necessary to counter source at multiple vendors. And you're trying to reduce complexity by just getting started. For more established businesses, you have done the work, you've done some counter sourcing on your top sellers, so you know where you're going to get better pricing. Then things like COVID happen and you have to counter source all over again because borders shut down, countries shut down. That was a big challenge for us. So it's very fortunate too for the backup plan to have your products sampled at multiple vendors so that if there is a price increase or a vendor closes, that you have a backup option. I think after you do that, you have your wheelhouse of like different categories that you're in, and you have to establish your working target. You've got to have an annual target, and price increase, I think, plays into that. If I'm shy of my target, I often will take a back half price increase. And I know just from my business that there's a perception of stone, and you can price different prices for different stones. So I think that we do testing with a company called First Insight. Actually, if I'm nervous about a price increase before doing it, I will reach out to our customers, have them do a survey for us on what they're willing to pay. And you can see their willingness to pay by different stones. The results are unbelievable. Like we have like 90+% accuracy of what comes back. And then the consumer gets a 20% off for participating in the survey. So they get something, but we get great information just by asking our customers and making sure that they see the same value in things before we do something that could be potentially risky. But I think you have to take risks on things, and if something's a bad margin, but you believe in it, I think it's fine to test it, and then you got to figure it out. You need great PD partners who are going to provide you options, and you've got to explore different vendors to figure out how to get to the margin you need.
I love it. Well, and speaking of margins, there's two questions here that we have about thinking about the importance of controlling your price at third-party retailers and Amazon. So Jessica, I'm going to ask you about that, and then Wendy, I'm going to get to you about how retailers play a role in this, for food and beverage. So Jessica, can you, and also Amazon for you too, Wendy, but Jessica, can we talk about controlling your price when you go across these third-party retailers, such as Amazon, the biggest one?
Sure. I mean, there's all of the new vendor compliance when you start selling with anyone. And for me, one of the most important things that we agree to is that we control the price. So we want an experience where anywhere the customer goes, whether or not it's Amazon or Nordstrom or Dillard's or Shopbop, like wherever they're looking at Kendra Scott, we would want to make sure that our pricing strategy is consistent. So Amazon's a hot topic for us right now because we do sell products on Amazon, and there are illegal third-party vendors who are undercutting us. So it matters for two reasons. You want the buy box, and you win the buy box if you have the best price. So we're in the process of, and we work with another company who helps us identify the illegal third-party sellers, and we're taking them down. And it's just, if you're going to play that game, you got to be committed to doing the work to be there and to make sure that you have the same perspective and point of view as you would in one of our stores. So like ship our Amazon jewelry actually ships in our Kendra Scott yellow box with the bow, because we want consistency of experience, that thread that's from our retail stores through our Amazon business, because we want to make sure that we're protecting our brand integrity.
Perfect, thank you. And then Wendy, for you, I know there's kind of two parts to this for you, because food and beverage is also sold in Amazon, but also how margins and everything play inside retailers. So question number one, for retailers, and I know you mentioned a little bit about store placement, but how does that play into it for food and beverage that you've seen?
Yeah, so I haven't seen many food and beverage companies enter into the kind of deals that Jessica was talking about, but you certainly have to think about how the retailer views your price. So I always think it's good to do what I call value chain, is go from retail price, how much is the retailer making, how much is the distributor making, how am I making, and kind of do the math all the way through, because you definitely want to make sure that your retailer is making, the right margin on your product so that they'll have every incentive to sell it. That also, you need to know that also to make sure that you understand what they're going to put the product on the shelf for. So if you charge them a really high price, then they're going to put it on the shelf for a higher price than you intended. So you need to be able to understand all that math of how it looks. And like I said, you want your retailer to make an appropriate margin on the product, because if you're asking them to make a really small margin, they're not going to give you good placement. They're not going to emphasize your product. They're not going to want to help you sell. Similarly, you don't want to give them too high a margin, because then that's going to put pressure on you. So it's really good to understand, and you can talk to tons of people in the industry, and you can just ask them, hey, what kind of margin does Whole Foods like to make in this category, or what kind of margin does Kroger like to make in this category, and you can get some kind of intelligence from the community around that, and just make sure that you're doing the right thing that's kind of in the range of what that retailer expects to earn.
What about with Amazon? I know they're obviously brick and mortar retailer, but anything special with Amazon that you've encountered, or helping smaller brands get out there? Because it's an important channel, but anything to think about there for pricing, except keeping it the same?
So I'm keep it the same to the greatest extent possible that you can. Amazon is always a challenging one, because you don't want to set up a situation where Amazon is able to price your brand at a much lower level than another retailer, or even worse, your own direct to consumer. And similarly, you don't want to price your own direct to consumer lower than it would be priced in a retailer or in Amazon. So it's really a balancing act. What's great to be able to do is to offer, again, I come back to packaging, different packaging to these different players, because that allows you to differentiate and not have them kind of stepping on each other's toes as much as you might otherwise.
And you talked a little bit about, and I love this idea of the packaging variations on your brand.
Mhm.
And I think about the one that I always think about is like Justin's peanut butter, from the big peanut butters to the little squeezy ones that I would see, like grab and eat in my car to go. So can you talk about like the variations that you've seen there and how that might work and play with pricing a little bit?
Yeah, so a good example that I like to talk about sometimes is French's mustard. Good yellow mustard. You go to Costco, you're gonna get like a gallon jug of French's mustard, and it's gonna be really cheap on a per ounce basis. And then it kind of dials down in size until you get to the little packet that you get in a fast food restaurant. And some of that is driven by consumer patterns, because the consumer wants a single serve packet when they're eating their burger right then. But a lot of that is also driven by who's going to be more price sensitive and who's going to be willing to work with different package sizes. So the person going into Costco is willing to buy a really big package of French's mustard because they want to pay a low price per ounce. And then you have everything kind of in between. So I love being able to use packaging. I know that can be challenging sometimes for smaller brands. It depends what your category is too, but really using different packaging will allow you to charge the right price in different channels, which is a great place to be. And again, prevents them from stepping on each other's toes. Because I guarantee if they're stepping on each other's toes, they're gonna step on your toes real hard.
Right. Jessica, I'm going to move on to what if you get pricing wrong? Yeah, what happens if you get pricing wrong? And then I guess my second question is, what do you do about it if it happens? Because it can happen, right? It happens to the best of us.
So what we'll do is we're very planful about a price increase. We'll if we need to take a price increase, we'll do an annual price increase, and we'll do our pre and post analysis, right? And say, let's take all of these styles up $5. And then you have to do the work, and you have to look at, you have to look at your margin dollars and your unit velocity, and just was it worth it? Was it worth it? And what we'll do is, this is something little, but very important. If you're going, you have to think about your tickets, your price tickets, and making sure that whatever your price ticket is flexible. You don't want a sticker on the bottom that you can't easily pull off. Using a price tag, you want it to be perfect so that you can pull it off in the case of a price increase. It's just price increases is a major hassle for everyone in the field, because you actually have to go out and change everything everywhere to maintain consistency. So what I do is plan my price increase in January. Then I print blank tickets for 4 months of reorders. And then I roll after 4 months, where I know my network and my community is clean, then I will take the price increase. But if you get it wrong, you just got to go back and fix it. And I think you want to make sure that there's measures and ways that it's easy to do, where you alleviate some workload.
Wendy, anything there if you get pricing wrong? What do you do?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get pricing wrong, and to Jessica's point, test it as much as you can, and be able to adjust. Typically in food bev, if you're working with just a couple of retailers at a time, it's easier to make moves because you can work with the buyer, you can have those direct conversations, and you be able to make changes up or down if you need to. I would say that going down tends to be hard when you get into a bunch of different retailers, because when you're trying to take the price down, it's very easy for a retailer to just take that extra margin and put it in their pocket. And so if you're trying to price down, I would say to test in a small number of retailers so that you will have that flexibility. Moving up is also challenging because retailers usually want to know why and what's going on, and sometimes it's best if you make it a win for them and be able to test and demonstrate that they'll make more money actually when you increase your price, which a lot of times is the case. Not always, but a lot of times. So I think that I think that's a really good way to go, is to test, learn, and then make changes up or down.
Perfect. I have a really great question here from Maria. Wendy, I'll start with you, and then Jessica, I'll get to you next. How would you recommend responding to someone that says our product is expensive? And yes, it's expensive for a reason. We're not selling yellow mustard at Costco for a reason. So Wendy, how do you respond to that? And then Jessica, I'll get to you next of how you guys respond to yeah, it's expensive. What do you guys usually say?
Well, for me, that's not a negative. Because like I said, that's communicating something about your brand. If you're expensive, you have to have value behind that, which is that, whatever your brand is communicating, the features and benefits, all that good stuff. So to me, being expensive is not bad at all. I guess a question would be, who is saying your product is expensive, and are they saying it's bad? Is that a consumer? Is that a buyer? Who's saying it's bad? I don't think it's bad. And in fact, if you think about if you're trying to sell your brand to a strategic, you being expensive is a great thing for them. The strategics, at least in food and bev, they can sell stuff cheap. They have scale. They're going to get lower COGS than you can every single day of the year. But what they can't always do is be able to command those premium price points in some of the categories where you play and they play. So to me, it's not bad. I think you're demonstrating the value of your brand and the features and benefits that you bring.
Awesome. Jessica, would you like to add to that? Anything else there?
Sure. Well, there's been plenty of times that we've had our partners tell us that we're feeling expensive compared to other brands in our space. And we go back to our brand value and our brand proposition and what we do. And our brand offers stones, like precious stones, and that is our differentiation. That's the reason that our product's a little bit more expensive, is because there's natural elements included in a lot of our products. And so, I would say maybe don't internalize it and go with your guts, because that's what Kendra did and our brand did. And although we were the smaller brand at one point, we've built a very healthy business at a product that we were told was expensive.
It's true. Great. Well, thank you. And Jessica, I'm going to actually stay with you. What about discounts and promotions from your side of things? Would you like to talk about those really quickly?
Sure. I think during a year of COVID, we had to do a lot of discounts and we had to do a lot of promotions to kind of keep our business on track. It was really important for many brands, more now than ever. What I'd say about promotional strategies is that you need to keep them fresh. If your promotion strategy is just a blanket site-wide monthly 20%, then the perception of your brand is, wow, that's a very promotional brand. And it's like the J. Crew effect, right? You're like, I'm not buying anything from J. Crew until Thursday because I know it's going to be 40% off. So you have to keep it fresh, and you have to be smart about frequency of promotions, because you don't want to cheapen your brand. And the other benefit of not always doing the same thing is that maybe I own a lot of rose gold and I want to leverage the promotion to help me right size my inventory and draw some attention potentially to an inventory glut. Some things that we've seen that have been very successful for us this year are bundle pricing. Consumers usually buy 1.3 units per purchase. How can we get our consumer to buy 2? So the bundle pricing and moving the consumer into the next price bucket by doing things like 2 for $75 or 2 for $100. It's just, there's some psychological impacts too there, but we're getting a higher AOV and the consumer feels like they're getting a great deal. The other one that I think is definitely worth mentioning is the gift with purchase. Everybody likes free stuff. And we will pulse a few GWPs a year. There's 2 different thoughts around GWPs. One of them is you wouldn't want your GWP to be your core competency. So we rarely do a GWP with a stone in it. We'll usually focus on an all metal style because we wouldn't want to give away or cheapen our core competency. So we wouldn't give necklace to Lisa and a GWP. But cost is super important in your GWP, because you've got to evaluate your profitability after you just gave away thousands of products for free. Our buys are massive for GWPs, so we send them to the vendors that give us the best cost breaks so that we're negotiating well. But you can think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Is your GWP for you to get that customer to buy 2 units and drive your AOV? Is it to attract a new customer or a lapsed customer who hasn't shopped in your brand for a while? And And when you're thinking about the GWP and the product selection and what you're trying to do with it, you then have to go back to your customer analytics team, if you have a customer analytics team, and say, like, did we attract new customers with this? And if we did, and we need those new customers, you know, it gives you kind of information about what the promotion did, and you apply those learnings when you're building out your annual promotion calendar. So.
Perfect, thank you. Wendy, how about from your side for food and beverage for discounts and promotions?
Yeah, a lot of the same principles apply. It really comes down to, do you have a purpose for it? And really being clear on what that purpose is. So are you trying to drive trial? Are you trying to drive, you know, a higher basket size, you know, higher ticket? And being really clear on that in your mind, what you're trying to do with the promotion. And then doing the, I guess the evaluation afterward is, did it drive what I hoped it would drive? And did it pay out for me or not pay out for me? And if it didn't pay out, am I okay with that? You know, sometimes I see, especially with smaller brands, that, you know, they'll be asked to run some promotions to drive the velocity in the store, but then your investment in those promotions can really get out of control pretty quickly. And then to Jessica's point, you end up as a brand, which I used to work on a brand that was viewed by consumers as always on sale. That's really not where you want to be. You know, that really cheapens your brand, which is not great in general, and your financials suffer for it, but is also not great if you're looking at, you know, strategic acquirers. Being a brand that's always on sale is not great. So I think promotions can be good. Just be really clear in your mind why you're doing it and how much you're willing to give up.
Thank you very much. And one of the final questions we have, and please, if you guys have any questions, please keep them coming and put them in the chat. We'll definitely keep checking those there. One of the questions we had, and obviously Texas just went through Storm Uri, which did disrupt the supply chain amongst other things as well. We hope everyone else is doing okay now. But how do you guys how have you dealt, and how do you continue to deal with fluctuations of materials, cost, shipping? Wendy, I'm going to stay with you, and then Jessica, I'll ask you next. How do you guys handle that in your realm, Wendy?
Yeah, so it in the realm I'm currently in, it really depends on the category, how often you see that. In a previous life, I worked in the juice business actually years ago, and that's highly dependent on commodity prices for fruits and that kind of thing. And you just have to be agile and responsive. So it's hard working with, you know, like supermarkets and convenience stores and that kind of thing to move price around really frequently. Usually those retailers want 30, 60, 90 days notice. And then your distributors also want notice. So you need to, you know, think about how long does it take to actually move something through, because you can't be changing all the time, every time your cogs are moving around. But you do want to make changes as you need to, and think about it, because if it's something like a particular ingredient that everyone in the industry is experiencing much higher cogs on, everyone is going to be feeling pressure. And so you might want to think, okay, I should probably take a price increase and move it through that 30, 60, 90 day notice, whatever it is, move it through that process as quickly as you can. If it's something that you feel like is really just affecting you, maybe you made a bad decision on one of your ingredient contracts or what have you, then you may want to give it a little bit more time before you make a move.
Thank you. Thank you. Jessica, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
I definitely have some COVID thoughts on this.
Right.
We saw substantial price increases in our cost of shipping to the consumer. And it's always been very important for our brand that we don't charge the consumer for shipping. So I mean, it went up $5 per package. In addition, so we were already eating the shipping costs, but I think there was like an additional $5 increase in freight. And we didn't ask the consumer for all of it, but we changed our shipping policy to $3. And there's been no pushback from our consumers. Something that we thought was very, very important, and we still love the ability to offer it, but we just couldn't absorb all of that shipping increase. And it helps, but you're often just, sometimes you just eat it. Like sometimes if this raw material is just a certain price, but it's a strong seller and it's going to get you a lot of margin dollars because it's more expensive, you just have to take it and find it elsewhere.
Thank you. And how do we think about, we have the role of price for strategics and acquisition here. And Wendy, I'm going to hop to you real quick about that, thinking about pricing that way, and Jessica, then I'll come back to you. So when you're thinking about, you mentioned strategics earlier, what about that pricing, Wendy, as we start to think about that for these smaller companies who are growing?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the strategics, just are not in the business of buying brands that sell pretty cheap. That's just not that attractive to them. If they want to sell something for cheap, they can do it themselves, generally speaking. So it's just not that attractive for them. And you can read in the news going back years is, one of the things the big CPG firms have a challenge with is increasing their prices. You can think about if you're Kraft mac and cheese, and not to pick on my friends at Kraft Heinz, but Kraft mac and cheese, it's hard to take a big price increase on Kraft mac and cheese. People kind of know how much it costs. They've been buying it for a long time. So it's not that exciting for a strategic to sell something that's the same price as Kraft mac and cheese. It's not that exciting. But what's really exciting is these brands that are more premium, that can command much higher price points, that capture, the more premium consumers, and that's interesting for them. So I wouldn't feel like you have to compete head to head with the big strategics on price, because that's not going to make you more attractive to them. It's going to make you less attractive to them.
Jessica, anything there?
Sure. I mean, a little less on acquisition, but we will often do things just from this is back to just pricing. But we'll do things that are magic priced because we're trying to acquire a new customer, like the end use customer. So magic pricing for us, and we use it very, very rarely and very carefully, is to offer a really amazing price with the hopes that we're going to get a younger consumer, a new consumer into the brands. If we see that the magic price on a similar product is impacting the sales of adjacent type of products, we abort, right? So we take the price increase up. But what we found is we launched a collection of hearts, of Ari hearts, and we wanted to make sure that it had a fun, youthful expression. And our assumption would bring younger consumers into the brand by offering a product that felt more approachable for that consumer, and it worked. So I think it's something that you want to use carefully and very sparingly, but I think sometimes once you're established, a touch of smart pricing can really help you get new eyes on the brand.
And I would love to actually ask an additional question on top of that. If we're thinking about in-store versus online, because Kendra Scott obviously has your bricks and mortar and then online, and as you're trying to get in new customers, how obviously pricing plays a role there, but how do you start to get on those new customers when you think about brick and mortar versus online? What do you guys think about when you're trying to get on, say, a younger customer and bring them into the Kendra Scott brand?
Sure. I mean, I think we think a lot about our assortment strategy. Sometimes we'll localize our assortment to make sure that there's good college product in a town. Like, we'll have more UT Goldstone product in our Texas stores, and we'll add exclusives based on the strategy of that store and what we're trying to achieve. So the answer is a bit of localization based on the consumer that we want, and or a bit of VM shift in the stores. Like, if we felt like this was a much younger, more fashion customer, we might lead with fashion in the beginning of the store. We also have done some exercises too around placement in the retail network where we do heat mapping. So we'll take a store and we'll set it up, and then we have systems that show dwell time, what table dwelled the longest, then after what was your path throughout the store. So you know the flow and how people move through our stores and what fixtures they're most attracted to just from these heat mapping exercises. So we would basically use that information to say, in a younger market, we might want to lead with this table and with this product to make sure that the attraction is there from the beginning when they walk in the door.
Perfect. Thank you, Maria, for that comment. That was pretty funny. And then, Wendy, for you too, thinking about in-store versus, brick and mortar versus online, do you guys try different things as you approach these two avenues, and how does that work in food and beverage for you?
Yeah, so for some of the companies in my portfolio, they find that you need to have the same retail price online for the exact same item as on your direct to consumer store as you would see in the retail store. That means you're going to be making a great margin in direct to consumer and then a much smaller one in retail. But you just don't want to undercut your own retail partners. So that tends to be really important. There are components of you'll see certain markets. We're not as sophisticated in food and bev, Jessica, as I think you are in fashion, but there are components of where you do see different things emerging as more important in certain markets and less important in others. But I always do come back to using packaging. So if you have a particular market where people like to consume a lot of your product, wonderful. Offer the small package, but also offer a really big pack, and you'll be able to get kind of a trade up there. And then when you're in markets where you're just trying to get consumers on board with your brand and trying to get them to try it, really small size packages that they don't have to spend that much money, and it's like a little trial package that they can buy without much risk on their part to try the brand, I think is really important.
I love that. So one final question for you guys is, we talked about what you can do wrong in pricing, and then, what you can do when it has gone wrong, how you can fix it. But how do you evaluate when pricing has worked? And Wendy, I'm going to stay with you, and then Jessica, I'll go to you next. But how do you know when pricing has worked, and what do you do? How do you communicate that, and then kind of disseminate that across your company wide and use that for future use cases?
So there are certain retailers out there that you probably know who they are. You're very fortunate in naturally Austin to have some of them sitting in Texas there with you, who are just really good about partnering with small brands to try some things. And I think that's a great tool to be able to use. So you could go to Whole Foods, go to HEB, and talk to them about, hey, I want to check and make sure I have the right price for my product, and they'll let you test it a bit. And then when you can test, a little higher, a little lower, you can test it out in just a few outlets and see what's working really well, meaning what's delivering for the retailer, because that's critically important, and what's delivering for you, depending on your objective. Is it profitability? Is it, number of turns or whatever it is? Then you can take that story to other retailers and you can say, hey, I tested this in, 10 outlets and it worked really well. So I think that kind of test and learn is really important. And like I said, you're so fortunate there in Texas to have some good retailers to work with.
Yes, we do. Jessica, anything else there on, how do you know if your pricing has worked, and then how do you communicate that and think about it for future state down the line?
Sure. I mean, we always say that we are really here to be in service to our stores. So if we get it wrong, they pick up the phone and tell us, like, this is too expensive, this is not going to work. There's so many really amazing staff within our retail network and stores that there's a lot of loud voices when they feel like we get it wrong. So the consumer will tell our staff, that our sales associates will let us know. And I think you have to be in your stores, and you have to be in your markets, and like looking at other people engaging with product. Like, you have to engage in your retail network. You got to be close to your consumer. And I think if you're close to your consumer, then you're much more likely to get it right, because you just see shopping behaviors and what people respond to, what stones and what types of things have increased value. So I think stay really close to your consumer and make sure that your retail network is confident and comfortable to tell you that from the voice of their consumer or from their own personal experience that we feel too that the price feels wrong.
Perfect.
I agree with that, and I think it's about understanding for those retail outlets is understanding what does working mean for them.
Totally.
And I think you can just ask that question, is like, what would be a win for you? And you can find that out, because maybe it's the penny profit for them. Maybe it's the percent margin. Maybe it's that they're trying to drive traffic into a part of the store that they feel like doesn't have enough traffic, or you can find out from them what a win looks like for them. And then how do you help them get that win?
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Jessica, before we move into Q&A, are there any just last minute advice or thoughts you want to share on pricing that we didn't get to cover in the Q&A?
There's one very simple pricing principle that I've done my entire career, which is the Post-it exercise. And I have every single time we're landing a lot, I've done this for 20 years. It's the Post-it exercise. And we take Post-its and we say 48, 58, 68, and we look at all of the products that we have, like, it's a final check to see, did we get it right across the board? And does it make sense within the pricing structure within the rest of the line for us? So we'll land a line of 30 new styles, and just below it on the Post-its are all of our ongoing core products and core styles. And it's just a simple exercise, but it really, really keeps us honest from a value prop of what's in those different price buckets. So that's just a little tip and trick of something that's really worked for me throughout my career.
It is so helpful. Thank you so much. And then Wendy, anything from you? Any last minute thoughts, or do you have a Post-it exercise of your own?
I don't have a Post-it exercise, but I think I want to have one now. I will have one now. But I think it really speaks to that price is an art and a science, that there's the science part of it. You got to do the math, you got to, look at some data, but then there's just an art part of it as well, which I think is what Jessica was talking about is, as you look at how it feels, does it feel right? And then use the data to either back that up or not back that up.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. And if you guys do have any questions on pricing, please go ahead and put those into the chat as we are starting to wrap up. One other final question I did have for you, just from a marketing perspective, is how closely do both of you, we were thinking about discounts and promotions, how closely do you guys work with marketing on those promotions, and how do you guys tend to work together? I know sometimes, smaller companies, you are marketing intern and, CEO, but as you start to grow, how do you start to work with those and put pricing and your teams together to kind of make that work and message that out, if you will?
I can speak from my
Go for it.
I've always worked very, very closely with marketing. We have a weekly promotional meeting where we talk about short-term and long-term promotions. Mm-hmm. And we also find that if we were doing a GWP, for example, if we don't have the perfect model shot of the GWP, like if the marketing's not there, we're not going to see the same success. And like the GWP is a massive promotion for us. So we have to make sure that we get it all right. So we really work 360 partnership with all of the things that are necessary to make the promotion possible. It's also if we are promoting a style, but we don't have a model shot, like that impacts our promotions. So we do a checklist on our promotions and we go through the entire process to make sure that we're covered from all angles in very close partnership with marketing.
And Jessica, may I ask what GWP is, just to clarify, make
Yes.
sure I understand
Yes.
that?
It's gift with purchase.
Oh, gift with purchase.
Freebie. Okay. It's a freebie. So you buy something, I'm going to try to get your AOV from mid 50s to 70, or if it's a great GWP, I'm going to try to get you to $100, but then in return, you get a gift.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I had that right in my own brain.
Sorry, I was going to try not to do that, but thanks for asking.
No worries. Thank you. I was like, I think I know this, but I just want to make sure for my own accord. And then Wendy, from your perspective for marketing, how often, do you work with them, hand in hand?
It's really important to be closely connected and tied at the hip. And I'm also going to add that it's really closely to be connected with your supply chain, procurement folks as well. Everybody needs to be working together because you don't want to run a promotion and now you run out of stock. That's really bad, That's bad for your consumer. That's bad for your retailer. And it's bad for you. So it's really important that everybody stays closely connected. Similarly, you don't want to be running a price discount at the same time that the marketing team is putting out there some very premium messaging, and then you have a price discount happening at the same time. So it's really important that everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction and everybody knows what they need to deliver to make the whole thing work together. So it's cross-functional partnership is critical.
Absolutely.
I love it. All right. Well, if there's any questions, Katrina, Sarah, do we have any questions coming in so far? I didn't see anything here yet, but if you guys do have any questions, please go ahead and put those into the chat here as we start to wrap up our pricing panel. And thank you guys both so much for doing this with us. This has been so interesting. And I guess my only other final thing here is Wendy, talking about the psychology of pricing and thinking about that, you're talking about different bottle sizes. Like, how do you guys do that for Diageo when we're thinking about all the other psychology, the brand colors and everything else? I think you mentioned that when we did our pricing panel last year. Is there anything else to consider there psychological wise that we didn't touch upon?
Oh, is there something I touched upon before that I forgot about, Emily?
Not to put you on the spot there, but yeah, just thinking about other psychologicals. We're thinking about, I know we're talking about the brand position and how much you guys think about that brand position, how important that is. How do you weave that into the psychology of the brand and overall?
So, you mean related to pricing and how you want to price it?
Yeah.
Please tell me if I forgot something that I said before that I'm not catching on to. But it's critically important, and we think about things. In Diageo and Coke, where I worked before, is even when you're thinking about the bottle size, is it like a short and fat bottle? Is it a tall and skinny bottle? And what does that communicate psychologically about how the consumer perceives the value of that bottle? Whether that's a lot of product or a little product, it depends on the category, but sometimes that makes a difference. You see, I'll talk about my former employer for a moment. You see Coke right now doing a lot of, tall, skinny bottles. Yeah. Those convey to a consumer a more premium message than a shorter, fatter bottle or a shorter, fatter can or bottle. So, thinking about all those things and what's the psychology and how does the consumer perceive it is really important. And I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating. Now, it can get out of control though, because you also have to be practical. I have seen in a couple of cases where sometimes a brand will go out there with like a tall, skinny, beautiful bottle, but it's so tall that it doesn't fit on the shelf physically. And now they can't get into any retailers because they don't physically fit on the shelf. So there are limits to playing with some of those psychological components.
That's what it was, Wendy, was the psychology of the bottle and how you guys thought about that. And as I sit here with your former employer, these things are just the devil. They're
the price per ounce on those is really high.
Yes.
So what they have done, which very clever on them, is realize that people will pay to be forced into portion control. And so you're paying a higher price per ounce to be forced into portion control to have a smaller can. It doesn't matter as much for Diet Coke, but if it's for full sugar Coke, you're willing to pay more on a per ounce basis to be forced to have the portion control of a small can. I think it's fascinating.
I'm here for it. And that's what I love about it. And thinking about those tall bottles, that's what we were talking about last year, Wendy, that I found that so fascinating, even just the bottle shape. And, I'm sure, Jessica, there might be something there psychologically too, even if it's just like the packaging and how you guys think about that for pricing. Is there anything in Kendra Scott that you are in your past, careers that you guys have thought about as well?
Well, the only thing from a packaging perspective that we've done recently is make sure that we couldn't fit multiple boxes in a shipper. So we just reduced the size, we created our boxes down like puzzle pieces so that we're optimizing our shipping costs and can fit multiple boxes in a shipper. I do think there is some consumer behavior, consumer perception of what you're buying and what it goes in. So our fashion jewelry goes in a much more youthful, fun, bright box. And our sterling and fine jewelry, which is our premium brand experience, goes in a much more elevated white box. So I think it's important to think about the product that's inside and how you convey messaging about the product that's inside through your packaging.
And then pricing that out accordingly.
Totally agree. And you may think that doesn't apply when you're talking about a product that's $2 or something, but it does. Is it really hard for me to open up this bottle? And does it have I had talked to a brand one time that had a pull tab. The bottle was sealed with a little pull tab, but it was such a cheap one, and it looked like it was a bottle of prescription medication, and this was for a beverage. So really think about what is that brand experience, because you make that brand experience better, it might be worth paying the extra penny for that pull tab, because then you'll be able to charge more for the product.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. We had an experience with an ice cream that I will not name it here, but we could not get it open, and it would not open. And I was doing everything I could to open this ice cream, kids screaming, and you're trying to do all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know why I can't get this open. What's happening? And I was so upset because I had 3 different flavors of it, and none of them would open. And I was like, what is happening? So I, of course, go to the intertubes, and I start, Googling and researching. And it turns out that this brand actually had people have been using knives and cutting themselves, and bad things were happening because they just had the wrong kind of screw with the cap. And I guess they were trying to save some pennies there, but it really turned into a PR nightmare for them, just because it was now all over the internet that they had done this. And so things to think about when you're thinking about your customer. And this is like a small little thing of ice cream. It's not like it was, and it does make a difference in the overall customer experience. And this is where pricing plays a huge role in that. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for your time. Wendy and Jessica, this has been so wonderful. And I really appreciate everything you've done here. So thank you guys. And Katrina and Sarah and Naturally Austin, thank you guys for putting this on. So anything else, Katrina, that we have before we say goodbye?
Yeah, no, I mean, this was great. This is really fascinating. I just personally learned so much. I'm so grateful for your time. You are all experts in all the things that you do. So I know that a lot of the brands here can immediately implement some of the things that we learned today.